Welcome to Chamber Chat. This is John Tayer, President and CEO of the Boulder Chamber, and I welcome you to our bi-weekly opportunity to check in with our Boulder Chamber membership and the business community at large about some of the things that were happening here at the Boulder Chamber and all the work we're doing to support our businesses, strengthen our economy, and lift our community. And today we have an excellent conversation on tap, which is going to be a discussion with some leaders in our arts community, the manager of the City of Boulder's Arts and Culture Office, Matt Chasansky, as well as Melissa Fathman, who is the executive director for the Dairy Arts Center. So we're going to have a chat with them about how is our arts and culture community faring through the pandemic, and what are they excited about as we get ready to lift this cloud of COVID and start getting back to some of these great arts and cultural activities. But before I do that, a couple of quick announcements here from the Boulder Chamber. So first of all, you might have already thought election season's got to be over, but as soon as it's over, it's starting again, and it's getting ready. We are getting ready for the 2021 election cycle, which includes city council and some other local political contests. And we have what is become a great tradition for the Boulder Chamber, 20 years of our College of Political Knowledge, which is the opportunity for those who are considering running for city council or for other political office, and others who just want to learn about the process, to come and hear from the experts. How do you run for office? What are the rules? And then also, what are some of the tricks of the trade from some of the successful candidates who have gone the gauntlet of running for public office? So we urge you to attend that. That's on May 6th, and it's going to be a virtual event online May 6th from 5 to 6:30. And again, we'll have great leadership from the City of Boulder that explain the election process. We'll have some great winning candidates to tell you some of their secrets. So if you're thinking about running, this is the great place to start. And then second, we have a wonderful, important Boulder Young Professionals event. And why do I say important? Because nothing's more certain than death and taxes. And the tax filing deadline, which has been extended to May 17th from the typical April 15th time period, that is coming up. And we want to make sure that you are equipped to address some of these great opportunities for different kinds of credits that you can be eligible for, to answer any questions you have about some of the new tax regulations. So that is going to be an event that's hosted again by our Boulder Young Professionals, and it's called Filing for Your Business and Personal Taxes. And that's on May 4th. Again, another virtual event, 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And we'll have some experts available to answer your questions and again, help you to make sure that you're paying the lowest amount of taxes that responsibly you can, and to make sure that you're following all the guidelines. So make sure to attend that. That's May 4 from 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And then finally, just mention that most of our events right now are still virtual, but we're starting now to get to the point where we hear on May 16 that the county will then move us to level blue, which will be the all clear date for events and allow us to start to move toward the Boulder Chamber having in-person events and along with some hybrid components. And we feel comfortable doing that because right now we know that about 50% of Boulder residents have at least one of their two shots, and about 30% are already fully vaccinated. So we're starting to feel comfortable about bringing all of our great Boulder Chamber family members together. So we're developing some guidance from our public health officials, making sure that we're going to bring people together safely. Also making sure that we're accommodating all the comfort levels that folks have with such a gathering. But the exciting thing is getting everybody back together. So we're looking forward to, again, developing those guidelines through the month of May. We will then plan that in June, we'll start with some hybrid in-person events, use probably the smaller ones. And then by July, we're ready to get back full force with all of our chamber family, friends, and stakeholders. So looking forward to that. So just make sure to follow us online so you know whether you're going to be meeting online or whether you can actually come together with all of us. So looking forward to that. Okay, enough from the Boulder Chamber perspective. Now we're ready to hear from some of our great stakeholders. And again, it's about the arts and cultural community. And, you know, I often talk about the arts as a huge part, not just of our economy, but of our community character. And it's a part of our economy because arts and culture is in of itself a huge contributor to our tax base and also providing jobs and supporting other businesses that work with the arts industry. But it also is a huge contributor to the character of our community. One of the things that makes our great quality of life is the attractiveness of the arts and cultural opportunities. And it also draws many businesses into our community that want to be around a community, and their workforce want to be around a community that has such great arts and cultural venues, entertainment, and activities. So want to know how that arts and cultural community is doing and how it's fared through the pandemic period. And so we have no better folks to speak about that than, as I mentioned, Matt and Melissa. Matt from the manages the Office of Arts and Culture for the city, and Melissa, who is the CEO for the Dairy Arts Center. And so I'm going to start with Matt and ask you, Matt, first of all, if you could just tell us, what happened to our arts and cultural community through the pandemic season, and what kind of support were you able to give them to help them to survive during this difficult, challenging time?
Yeah, well, thanks very much, John, for keeping your eye on these issues. And it's been really scary what has happened in the arts community since March of 2020. Before then, in the data that we were looking at, as you say, the arts were an important part of the economy. We last did a study in 2015 using 2015 data of the nonprofit community. We also looked at the greater creative community, for-profit and nonprofit. And in those cases, it was proving that the arts were a significant employer. They were generating almost $70 million in direct spending, an employment of about 1,800 people in the nonprofit sector, about 4,500 working professional artists, and about 10,000 workers in the creative sector as a whole. And those aren't the biggest employers in Boulder, but they're significant, and they are gateways to a lot of different economic activity that happens. And as many of your members will know, the millions of people coming into Boulder, or the activity that's happening in Boulder with residents in the arts, in the theaters, museums, and festivals, that activity was a ripple effect out into a lot of different types of industries. And so when the pandemic hit, we knew that very specific challenges were going to be put in place. The primary thing being the restrictions and the closures of theaters, museums, and public gatherings. And that necessary decision to save people's lives really had an impact. And we first were expecting that to be felt through the nonprofit community and in some for-profit arts businesses. And we would start seeing some temporary closures, some permanent closures. That has not been quite as severe as we expected. But what is really impactful is the loss in revenues of those businesses and the loss of employment. And the best data that we have right now is actually from Colorado Creative Industries. They did a study along with Colorado State University. And they looked at numbers from May to July of 2020. And they found that statewide, the loss in jobs was at over 50,000 arts jobs. And that most of that was concentrated in the fine arts, music, theater, visual arts. There's also $2.6 billion in lost revenue in that industry. And this is an industry which, is important, but not the biggest, right? And so that was a major impact, and it represented about 10 years of growth in those industries that evaporated in just those few months. And since then, we know that things have, I don't want to say stabilized, but gotten not quite as bad. That the jobs continue to be scarce in the arts. We're worried about the drain on the brain power that represents and being able to build that back. But there have been resources that were put in place, not only by us, our grants program and the way that the city has organized some of the CARES Act funding, what we're looking at for the American Rescue Plan. There's ways that local government has come in to try and do some stabilization funding for nonprofits, for restaurants, for a lot of different parts of the sector, right? There's also been state grants. There's been collaborations with foundations. There's a great one where a local philanthropy group called Create Boulder, the Bonfils Stanton Foundation, the Denver Foundation got together and created a statewide fund. There's also funding coming directly from the federal government for things like the Shuttered Venues Operators Grant. So there's been a lot of funding, and what that has done has basically been a lifeline. It hasn't brought back the employment. It hasn't filled the gap in the revenue. It's simply been able to make these types of businesses survive some of the worst of this to bring us around. And so we're very optimistic, right? Like that type of support seems to have done that job. It's definitely a situation that is creating more problems down the line. But we know that at least in Boulder, the closures of venues and theaters, the loss of nonprofits, the closure of businesses, the few that have closed have been tragic, but it hasn't been as bad as we had thought. So the real thing to keep your eye on is the employment. That's the part of the arts community that's hurting the most.
I hear you. It's been so interesting. I mean, so what you're suggesting is that through some of this support, we've been able to maintain the foundation of arts and culture in our community, but it's some of the creative assets, some of the workforce, et cetera, that's been may have been lost. Well, let me just ask you, just building off of just now going forward, what has been some of the innovation that maybe you've seen in the arts community to respond to pandemic that then gives you hope for going forward? And then a second part of this question for me is, what do we as the Boulder community, as citizens that want to see the arts community come back strong, how do we support their vitality?
Right, yeah, I think some interesting things have happened. I mean, first of all, the leaders of our nonprofits are a creative, scrappy bunch, and they are making things happen, right? And they are rising to the occasion to not only sustain their businesses, to stay engaged with their communities, but also the part of the arts that's about resilience in the community and the social infrastructure. The arts community has stepped up in ways to make sure we stay connected. And that's really important to what might change in the future. I think some of the other things that have been really interesting is that creativity has resulted in some lessons that might be long lasting, right? So we had a lot of arts organizations and artists start to produce online work, start to do outdoor socially distanced performances and events. We've had events in parks and golf courses, and Melissa is so critical to helping us set up the program at the band shell so that we can have a performance arts series that helps sustain organizations there through the summer. So thank you, Melissa, that was great. But a lot of those things I think are gonna last. I mean, we're all looking forward to when these restrictions ebb away and we can start to gather in the ways that we used to. But the fact of the matter is that this pandemic is the first wave, and climate change and adaptation to those changes is coming. And a lot of the lessons that artists are teaching us about how to do work online, how to gather in different ways, are going to be important for that. Because when we're dealing with extreme weather, or we're not going to be able to have events in the middle of the day, in the middle of the summer in Boulder anymore, or we are going to have an online option in order to bring people together in the case of a future pandemic, climate change has impacts to all those things. And so I think some of these lessons that are going to be carried forward are going to help with that adaptation issue, which is going to be really important because, as I said, the arts are a pretty critical way to build social infrastructure. How we connect with each other, check up on each other, stay resilient as a community, build equity in the community. That's going to be really important. So some of the things you can do to sustain these organizations, but also build towards some of those goals, is really just show up and show up virtually. Stay connected with the organizations that you were attended performances before. Investigate new places, buy art from local artists. There are a lot of ways still that we pivoted online that you can be supportive, and to be sure that you are not only expressing your support by buying a ticket or buying a piece of art or something like that, but also in staying in the conversation, right? That we want to make sure that other people know that this is still an important part of the way that we're going to emerge. And so making sure that you and your neighbors are staying connected through these things. It's about making community more connected and resolute. So the arts are going to help you with that. Take advantage of everything they're offering.
I love it. I love it. It's the arts contribute to our community in so many ways, in just building our innovative spirit and culture, but also lifting us in difficult times. And I just love your connection, Matt, that you make between some of the other future challenges that we may face and the resiliency that we have hopefully built in our arts and culture community through this challenging time. So I thank you so much for being with us. And I've always admired your leadership of our arts and culture community through your work at the city, but never more than during a difficult time, Matt. And I particularly appreciate your ability to speak on behalf of the arts community and its value to not just our economy, but to also to just the character of Boulder's community. So thank you so much for being with us. And now I'm going to turn the conversation to Melissa. Melissa Fathman, who is the executive director of the Dairy Arts Center, and somebody who came into this role not too much before the pandemic struck. And so I'm just going to start by welcome you, Melissa, and ask you just how did you, the Dairy Arts Center, and all those organizations that you host at the Dairy Arts Center experience the pandemic as it came forward, and how did you survive it?
Yeah, it's hard to believe that it was just a year ago. A lot has happened, and I think our story is very similar to many other arts organizations. When we first shut down, there was a moment like that scene in the movie Jaws, when Dennis Hopper is like, "We need a bigger boat." That's what it felt like. But rather than a big shark, it was more like a massive tsunami of cash that just was flowing out the door, at a time when we had no potential for earned revenue coming in. We particularly because we're a venue and we rent out our theaters and we handle ticketing, for other organizations, we were having to refund, when all was said and done, up to $100,000 in ticket and theater rental revenue that we'd already collected, on top of having to pay bills with no money coming in. So it was pretty severe, right at the moment when we had to close. And it was crystal clear to me, like if you have a flood in your house, you got to shut off the valve. Every single expense I could think of, we had to cut. And it was emotionally heart-wrenching, to lay off so many people. I laid off almost 30 people all at once. Some of whom had been working at the dairy for over 20 years. And as I said, I know a lot of organizations had similar experiences. But I have to give a lot of kudos to the Boulder Chamber and other groups of business-oriented folks and entrepreneur types that came together. I don't know if you probably remember that time, John, when it was just like, how can we help? We're finance people. We're crisis people, like, do you need my help? And, and so I got a lot of advice and support, because although we are a business and I'm a math major, I'm also an opera singer, we have this like art business thing going on, but we had to put on our finance heads to get through it. to pivot financially. And so, I just want to send out a big thank you, in particular to Phil Votiero from High Plains Advisors. He hooked up with me, and we met every week, and we were literally going through forecasting spreadsheets that I'd put together, and he would say to me, cut that. He was like the Marie Kondo of the finance world. He's just like, get rid of that, which I needed, because it's such an emotional time, and you need like a clear-headed person saying like, no, you don't, you got to get rid of that. So he was awesome. I called him my coach. He would send me back out into the ring, once again, bruised and swollen. But he was great. And so that kind of thing was going on behind the scenes, But to the outside world, we realize as arts organizations, the community relies on us to get us through dark times. And so we had to also quickly pivot and, as Matt was saying, figure out how to deliver artistic content in a whole new way, almost overnight. So, another kind of funny story is, I was talking to somebody about, how do we do this? And I clearly remember asking the question, what is Zoom? Which, of course, by now is a funny question to ask, but we literally had to come up with a whole new platform, what kind of content it could be, and how we can monetize it, all of those things. And then after the panic settled down and we had been doing online content for a couple of months, then it started to become almost fun. You get to become clever and you get those creative juices flowing. And so we came up with doing drive-in movies in our parking lot, and we had this beautiful big white wall facing the Flatirons, and so that became our movie screen. And then we have a loading dock back there also, and so Glenn Webb, who's our director of programs, decided, we could turn this loading dock into a stage. Like, let's do some concerts and comedy shows out here. So that's how we pivoted.
Love it. I love it. It's funny. I mean, just that innovation that takes over, which is part of the culture of an arts organization, but it definitely was needed in the business context as well. And I also appreciate what you say, Melissa, about just the folks who stepped up to support. And Boulder is known as a community that is collaborative in its business activities, but it was put to the test during the pandemic, and just appreciate you recognizing those folks who came to the support of the dairy. So, let's start to believe that this cloud is lifting of COVID-19, and we now have just things to look forward to. And I just wonder, from your perspective, what do you look forward to at your organization broadly? And then maybe are there lessons that you've learned from the COVID experience that you're just going to excitedly bring forward into the future?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the lessons, because those lessons sort of pave the way for what we're going to do next and what we're excited about. COVID, it did have its silver linings. I know it was horrible in many ways, but in terms of the dairy, the dairy is such a busy place. I mean, pre-COVID, such a busy place, so much going on. Kind of like a machine, that never stops. We had shows almost every night, several theaters, popcorn popping, movies showing, and it was just like being on a hamster wheel of activity, which was great, except that it leaves very little time for reflection, very little time to, even if there are things you want to do differently, it's kind of like you feel like, well, I can't stop the machine from operating in this way, because what if it doesn't work that well? So there was a little bit of fear in making big changes. And of course, as a business, you worry about revenue because you have to pay the bills. And so, you don't want to take too many chances. And so essentially our biggest nightmare came true, which was to shut down, which became a blessing in a way, because, we had this time to reflect. And of course, as a nation, we went through not just the pandemic, but all kinds of other, terrible violence and all kinds of things, that we all know about. But it gave us a chance to reflect as individuals, but also as an institution, and to really think about, like, what is what is truly important when all is said and done? Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Not just what is our mission, but what do we value? So we took some time as board and staff to think about that, and we identified 4 priorities that we wanted to carry through not only our operations but also our kindness. And we decided we wanted to focus on kindness, empathy, equity, and justice. And so that was kind of what gave us the courage to go through with establishing a new program that we're very excited about, and a permanent space in the dairy for Indigenous artists. And it's, I'm told, never been done before in this area quite like this, but I gathered a bunch of Indigenous artists together and just had a conversation and basically said, what do you guys want to do? You've been completely underrepresented, not only in the dairy, but in the region, and I want to change that. And I don't want to tell you what to do. I just want to give you a platform. I want to give you a space. You guys do what you want to do. And we had some wonderful conversations. And then they ended up with the mission of, we want to heal Earth and humanity through creativity. And so that's what they're doing. They have an exhibition coming up in a couple of weeks that will be open to the public. And they have lots of ideas for Indigenous comedy shows and concerts and all kinds of things. And that's just one part. We are moving forward this summer with more outdoor programming because it went so well. And, even though there may be a time soon when we're allowed to have people inside, we're still playing it a little bit safe, because again, it's that revenue quotient, just because you can do something doesn't mean people will want to do it. So, we're playing it safe and planning concerts out in our back porch area, the loading dock, as well as the band shell. And what a great idea that was. So thank you, Matt, for coming up with that. And it's wonderful. It's not just the dairy benefiting from that, but all kinds of arts organizations that, couldn't fit on our loading dock for one thing. They need a much bigger stage. So we're really excited to invite everyone back, whether it's outdoors or indoors, to the dairy.
I love it. That's a beautiful theme to close on, too. Welcome everybody back. And with that, those beautiful values, I think it, kindness, empathy, equity, inclusivity, I think you said.
Justice.
Justice, yeah. I mean, just beautiful values. And just that note that I think a lot of us feel, which is, this was a totally challenging time, but a great opportunity for reflection on what's important. And so I'm excited about what that means for the Dairy Arts Center, for our arts, culture, community overall, and then just in terms of all of us individually, having that time of reflection and getting prepared for the next chapter. So Melissa, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you also, Matt. Both of you great, important, critical leaders in our community, but for in particular, our arts and culture community that is such a beating heart of energy and innovation. So thank you guys both for being with us. So I'm just going to close out this chapter of Chamber Chat, and thank you all for being with us. I want to remind you that if you're thinking about running for office in this town, you got to be there at the College of Political Knowledge. That's on May 6th at from 5 to 6:30. That's a very important introductory event to running, or maybe deciding not to run because it's just so crazy hard, difficult, but learn about it at the College of Political Knowledge. And then also we have our Boulder Young Professionals event, making sure that you know how to file your business and personal taxes, answer all those questions. That'll be on May 4th from 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. So make sure to get those on your schedule. Looking forward to coming back in person soon. As I told you, looking to target July as when we get back fully. But it all matters that we help support keeping that virus down and making sure that we keep our community safe. So get that vaccine. And yes, you don't always have to wear your mask now. Again, we're going to start saying that you don't have to outdoors. But when you're indoors and you're close and you're walking around the restaurant, make sure put on that mask, and we'll see you next couple of weeks on Chamber Chat.